medicine this morning. But the good news is I don't have to worry about fleas or ticks for 30 days. So I'm good to go for today. And if you take medicine, I hope you took medicine, but I also hope you take the right medicine. Sometimes we do kind of mess up a little bit with that. Miss Laura, could you help out with some other passing out? One of the things that I wanted to share with you about my ministry is it's my family's passion project. All of my family, there are 12 of us, counting me, but my 3 daughters, my 3 sons-in-law, my 5 grandchildren, they're all involved with this ministry. They all hands-on have things to do with this ministry. And we basically want to raise awareness about the powerful impact of loss. And we want to encourage people who are dealing with it. But we also want to do that with a special interest in helping the widowed. The reason why the ministry is called Widowhood Workshop is because that, for most people, is the worst loss they experience this side of eternity. And so that's why the ministry is called Widowhood Workshop, but it doesn't simply deal with the widowed. So we're just really glad that you're here, and we're going to have some good discussion. I have some encouraging news. I did not come here to preach at you this morning, so you can relax. You may be in the auditorium in a church building, but I'm not going to preach at you. I don't even want to talk to you. What I want to do is talk with you. I want you to feel a part. I want you to feel free to contribute. Any fella here be willing to pass these out too? Somebody volunteer to do this? The notepads and the ink pens are a gift from my family to you, thanking you for choosing to come this morning to the workshop. And we want you to feel free to take a note or two if you would like, because there is great value that's the wrong PowerPoint. Should be life, love, and loss. A number 1 in front of it, and then life, love, and loss. Thank you. Let's spend a moment in prayer before we start our class. Father in heaven, we thank you for the beautiful sunshine today. We thank you, Father, for the opportunity to be here. Father, when we stop and reflect about the abundance of the blessings we have, it really is amazing. We were able to get up out of bed this morning, and there are a lot of people who would love to be able to do what we just did earlier today. We've been able to get dressed. We've been able to get out and be with others in public. And there are many, many people who would love to have those blessings. It is so easy for us to take for granted the multitude and the quality of the blessings we have. Father, forgive us. Help us to be more thoughtful, more reflective, and more specific in our thinking about how abundantly blessed that we are. Father, thank you for this church, the willingness to open the doors to offer this opportunity to discuss things that are very difficult in life. And we pray, Father, that as we talk about these things in person, we pray that it will be a blessing to those who are here. And then we also, if others happen to watch it later or are presently watching live stream, we pray that they'll be blessed as well. Father, we just need to learn and grow in a life where there's a whole lot of storms that we experience in this life. Help us, Father, to learn and grow for not only our benefit, but also to help us to help others. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay, well, I want to ask you to think out loud with me together, and that's what I'd like to call this, a thinking out loud together session. I want to think out loud together with you about life, love, and loss. And the place to start that is to think about the world where we experience life. Now, here's what I want you to do. I want you to give me a word or a phrase that you would use to describe the world that we live in. That really is pretty easy when you stop to think about it. Give me a word or a phrase that you would use to describe the world that we live in. Chaotic, okay? Chaotic. Doesn't take much to inform you of that, does it? You know, just sit and watch the news for a little bit, or listen to the news on the radio, or watch your Facebook feed. It's a chaotic world, boy, especially in an election year, a presidential election year. Very chaotic. Give me something else. I want to have you give me at least 5. This is really easy. Chaotic is one. Give me another one. Lost. Lost spiritually. And lost in the sense of, a lot of people don't know where they're at. I mean, they may be able to give you their address. They may be able to tell you the city where they're at, but in another sense, they're really lost. They're just lost people. There are a lot of people that are lost spiritually, that don't have the Lord, that don't know anything about the Lord's church, His love for them. And as a matter of fact, that's one reason why that this ministry exists, is we want to reach lost people by showing the compassion of Jesus and introducing them to the church. Because sometimes the most sensitive people to the gospel and the blessing of the gospel message are people who are hurt, who are struggling, and who feel need. So you got chaotic, you've got lost. Give me another one. Something that you would say is appropriate to describe the world we live in. Prideful. And when you stop and think about the things that are upsetting to God, or even that God hates, at the top of that list has to be pride. As a matter of fact, pride is the root of a lot of sin in the world and even in our own personal lives. Sometimes pride is the very problem that just grows a whole lot of other things that are ugly in our life. As a matter of fact, my suspicion is you probably have met somebody in your life who gave you the distinct impression they knew everything about everything. There's some people that will even tell you that. But the reality is nobody knows everything about anything. That's humbling. But that's the truth. Nobody knows everything about anything. That's literally true. And I don't say very many universal statements in my life because usually they come back to bite you. It's a very humbling thing to recognize the fact that when it comes to anything, I don't know everything. I've got stuff to learn, stuff I can learn from other people, stuff other people can teach me, and maybe I can teach other people a few things. We all have things that we can learn about and we can become more aware of in our life. And one of those things we need to become more aware of is loss, because we're going to experience it. You don't get out of this life without experiencing loss. Now, we've had 3. I'm challenging you 2 more. Give me 2 more things that we could say are descriptive of the world we live in. Unpredictable. Remember what James said in James chapter 4? We do not know what will happen tomorrow. It's a very unpredictable world. Anybody here ever lose anybody? Somebody passed away in their life, and it was a very sudden, unpredictable thing. Anybody here like that? Oh, yeah. Look, more of you than not. The most impressionable and most inspiring people that I have met in this ministry are younger women and men who lost their spouses or their children by death, just like that. Totally out of the blue. A couple days ago was the 2-year mark of Andrew passing away. Hopefully I'll be able to introduce you to him in the second session. 7 years old. Bradford, a guy who was driving through Trenton, Tennessee, in West Tennessee, where, by the way, the mile markers on the speed limit signs say 31. 32 is an offense. But anyway, he was driving through Trenton, Tennessee. He was in a terrible accident. He was married for about 1,300 days, and he left behind a widow. I can tell you about Tandy, who in West Kentucky came home and put her purse on her washer and dryer like she normally does. She walked down the hall and she found her husband in a pool of blood. She touched his arm to check his pulse, and that's when she felt the gun. And he had taken his life. There are some sudden things that can happen. I mean, cruel and brutal, sudden things that can happen that just shake us to the core of our being. Life is very unpredictable. How many times nowadays do you hear people say, if the Lord wills, when they reference something in the future? You know, when I first started going to church, I was about 15 years old when I first started going to church. Um, Back then, in the 60s, latter half of the 60s, I heard older gentlemen. Of course, when you're the age I was when I started going to church, who isn't old? I mean, past 30 would be old. But I used to hear people talk about the Lord wills, if the Lord wills. Um, Life is very unpredictable. And we need to realize that. Can you give me one more word that you would use to describe the world we live in? Upside down, okay. Wouldn't it be nice to be able to grab it and turn it right side up again? Who knew that we would be experiencing some of the things that we've experienced here in the last, let's say, 10 years? It's really, I call it blow me away. It's blow me away stuff. Becoming aware of things that are just, I would have never dreamed that people would have been thinking like this or people would have been doing things like this. But the reality is it's a weird world we live in. Now, I'm going to show you an image. And when I show you this image, I'm going to ask you to think out loud together with me about this image. Now, everything that your eye sees goes to your brain and prompts some sort of thought or feeling. Now, like for instance, if somebody opened the door and let a lion loose in the building, if you heard the lion roar or you saw the lion through your hearing, through your eyesight, it would have gone to your brain and your brain would have immediately responded. Okay, now you look at this image, and what does this image tell you? What does it communicate to you? Anybody? What's it say? Fun times. Where do you see the fun times in that image? Okay. You probably are one of those kids that broke his arm on the teeter-totter in elementary school on the playground. Yeah, I can see you doing that. Whenever you see this image, how about somebody else? What do you see? What does it tell you? Run. Okay. What else does it tell you? See, there's a lot of things you can see. Different people can see different things when they see a different image. What does this image tell you? A balance. There's more what? More blessings than burdens. Now, notice both those words are nouns. Now, verbs. Do any of you remember English class? Okay, verbs are action words, right? Okay, adjectives and adverbs, they modify. Okay, nouns. There's two nouns on that screen. One's blessings and one's burdens. Now, verbs have tenses, nouns have number. Neither one of them are singular. Both of them are plural. But somebody says the impression is there are more blessings than burdens. Now, I'm going to read you a passage in the Bible from Job chapter 14. I love the story of Job and how beneficial his heartaches have become to so many people. Job chapter 14, verse 1. I'm going to read this passage. I want you to think about what you see on the screen. Man who is born of woman. Now, do you know any other way to get born? I'm just curious. There are no politicians in this room, okay? So, well, I don't think. So, man can only be born of woman, right? So, Job gets a check mark on that one. He was spot on. Man who is born of woman is a few days. Now, does he get a check mark on that? Few days? Man who is born of woman, are we a few days? In the scheme of things, what do you mean by that? Good point. Compared to eternity, what is the length of a human being's life? Well, not much, is it? James chapter 4, verse 13, beginning, Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we'll go into such and such a city. We'll spend a year there, buy and sell and make a profit. By the way, have you ever thought about how arrogant that is? I can imagine them sitting in a board of trustees room and sitting around a big, fancy, expensive table and having a stick and a map and pointing with their stick. They're going to go to today or tomorrow. See, they're cocksure about the fact that they've got locked in time, that they're not going to die. Something's not going to happen between later on today or tomorrow. Today or tomorrow, we will go to such and such a city. They're assuming that they're going to have a safe arrival to these various cities. And then he says, we're going to spend a year there. Woo, that's pretty cocksure too. They think they're locked in for a whole year. We're going to spend a year there. We're going to buy and sell and make a profit. Have you ever known of somebody who had a business and the business failed? They couldn't sell much. And then they lost their business. They're so confident and so arrogant. He says, whereas you do not know what will happen tomorrow, for what is your life? It is even a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. Have you ever thought about how that statement about like a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes away, how that is so outside of the thinking of kids? For a kid, how does a kid heat water in a mug? They stick it in the microwave. How many of them have ever seen a tea kettle? And how many of them have ever been brought to the stove and maybe used this as a lesson, a visual lesson? Let them see that vapor that comes up and then disappears. See, a lot of kids are unfamiliar with that concept. But that's the way life is. Now, if that's true, is there anybody, oh, I think there is. Is there anybody here more than 90 years old? I looked at him when I said that because I think I remember didn't they make some big deal out of you turning 90? 3 years ago. I want to make a reservation to come to your 100th birthday. I'm going to ask Rebecca to make sure she tells me when your 100th birthday is because I want to be there. We make a big deal out of somebody turning 90 or 100, don't we? Now, when we refer to their life, what word do we use to describe their life? What kind of a life have they had? A long life. Why do we do that? That's the way we think. We think about 90 or 100 years being a long life. Well, it is from a human perspective. Now, let me tell you about being on Van Drive in Jackson, Tennessee one day. This was a couple years after my wife passed away. And for about 3 or 4 years after my wife passed away, I fasted from music on the radio. I couldn't handle it. The vast majority, at least from my perspective, the vast majority of music has at that time in my life a romantic overtone. And I couldn't handle it. I just couldn't handle. So I just fasted from the music. So that's a phase in my life when I became hooked on news talk radio. And I was listening to this AM news talk radio station in Jackson, Tennessee. And there was this guy who was a preacher, and he was teaching on the radio. And he made this observation, and when he made this observation, I thought, wow, that's a profound observation. He said, wisdom is when you see something the way God sees it. Immediately I thought, wow, that is an amazing observation. Wisdom is when you see something the way God sees it. Let me give you an example. If you see people the way God sees people, you have wisdom about people. If you see human relationships the way God sees human relationships, you have wisdom about human relationships. If you see money and possessions the way God perceives them, then you have wisdom about stewardship. When you see marriage, which our culture doesn't, when you see marriage the way God sees marriage, you have wisdom about marriage. Anytime we see something the way God sees it, we have wisdom about that subject. Now, when it comes to life, our life here is temporary. It has a beginning at conception, and it ends at death. Now, that means all of our human relationships here in this world also are temporary. And the reality is, it's just a short time. The book of Isaiah says God inhabits eternity. He's an eternal being. So he sees everything from an eternal perspective. Let me challenge all of us to look at time in that way. We think about time, maybe you've heard this phrase, time and eternity. No, let's just think eternity, because that includes all time. Look at things from an eternal perspective. In regard to your possessions, in regard to your relationships, in regard to your opportunities in interacting with other people, always think about things from the perspective of God. Think of them eternally and their eternal impact or their lack of eternal impact. He said, man that is born of woman, he was right, that's the only way you can get born, is a few days, and he's right about that. Now, the last phrase of Job 14:1 says, man who is born of woman is a few days and full of trouble. There's a footnote in my Bible at the word trouble, and it says up there, in regard to trouble, it could be turmoil. Now, what did Job say about turmoil or trouble? Did you listen carefully? Did you notice that? What did he say about turmoil or trouble? Life is what? Full. Now look at the screen. Is Job right or is the screen right? What does the screen say about life? There are more blessings than burdens. What did Job say? Life's full of trouble. This little bottle of water, 8 fluid ounces. If I take the top off and I do what Jesus commanded to be done at the wedding at Cana of Galilee in John 2, and he was going to turn the water into wine. Do you remember what he had them do in regard to the water pots? Fill them how full? To the brim. Okay, now the water level right here is about right here at the neck. Now, if I were to go ahead and go to a water source and fill it up right to the brim, it'd be full, right? Now, if something's full, what else can you put in it? Nothing. Man that's born of woman is a few days and full of trouble. Why did Job say such an extreme thing? Didn't he have any blessings? Now, here's my challenge to you. I'm sure you're, at least to some degree, familiar with the story of Job. Now, you tell me, name me one blessing he had. He said full of trouble. Give me one blessing he had when he was in misery, struggling the way he was. Name me one blessing. He had what? So do we thank God for life? Is that a blessing? Exactly, it is. Now, in his life, did he have any blessings? He had God. He had life and he had God. He had somebody in his life who loved him, who knew what was going on around him and going on inside of him, and that God, as a matter of fact, was in total control of what was going on. Remember Satan coming to him, coming to God, and saying, look, God, you know, he's not legit. You've been hedging him in. If you start taking some of those blessings away, he's not going to follow you anymore because people don't follow you for nothing. Well, God says, I ain't doing it. If you want to mess with him, you go right ahead, but don't you dare touch a hair on his head. Don't you touch him. You take away whatever you want to, but don't touch him. Well, Satan tried to destroy Job by reducing him from great prosperity to severe adversity. But then Satan's not satisfied because Job passed the test. And then Satan says, well, God, what you need to do is touch him. God said, I ain't touching him. If you want to touch him, you go right ahead, but don't you dare take his life. See, God was drawing the lines and required Satan to color within the lines. God is on the throne. There is nothing that you've experienced in your life that hasn't first passed through the hands of God. God is sovereign. The book of Job isn't just about the suffering of Job, it's about the sovereignty of God. Everything we've experienced in our life has first passed through the hands of God. Job had a God in heaven who loved him and cared for him and provided for him in the terrible storms of his life. He had life, he had God. What else did he have? He had friends. He sure did. You know what? Let me ask you to think a little bit more openly about his friends. He had friends. Job 2, let me read to you a couple sections here. Job 2:11. Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. Every time I read those names, I think, what mother would name their kids like that? But I've decided what you women go through to have babies, you can name them whatever you want to. You can spell it whatever weird way you want to. It's okay. You're in charge. Well, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, it says they made an appointment together to come. So they heard about a friend, this friend Job, and he hit on really, really hard times. Now notice what they do. It says they come. They came to him. They didn't send him an email and say, Job, we heard things are rough for you right now. Why don't you and your wife take a few days off and come to our place and just kind of get away from everything for a while? They didn't do that. They dropped everything in their life. Do you think those three men had anything else to do in their lives? I'll guarantee if they were married, they did. They had a honey-do list. Surely some of them had jobs or responsibilities, but that didn't matter. They dropped everything in their life, and they came to their friend. That's a friend. You know, if you want to minister effectively to people who are hurting, that's exactly what you need to do. That's exactly what I need to do. That shows tremendous love and care when we drop everything in our life and we go to hurting people. But you know, some people won't do that. And if I hear this one more time, somebody needs to restrain me. I hate it when I hear people say, oh man, I can't do that. I can't go there. I can't be with them. It's just out of my comfort zone. Do you know what that is? That's idolatry. Let's be real honest about it. That is idolatry. That is putting your comfort zone ahead of God's will for your life in ministering to them. That is idolatry. Do you think it was out of the comfort zone of these three friends? Well, if it was, it didn't matter. They came. Don't permit yourself to stay away from or refuse to minister or try to help people who are struggling just because it's going to be upsetting to you. I've got news for all of us. Our life isn't about us. It's about God and others. And what God wants us to do is use our life to help other people. And when we do that, He's glorified. And that's why we exist. We exist, Ephesians chapter 1 says, we exist for the praise of His glory. How do we do that? We be God's huggers. We be God's comforters. We be God's encouragers. We be God's correctors if necessary. Don't stop yourself from trying to help other people because of how it might adversely affect you. Your life is not about you. It's about honoring God and loving others. These three friends, they came to him. They were great. They weren't good friends. They were great friends. Now, not only that, these three friends, it says, they came, and it says, to mourn with him and comfort him. They came for the right reason. They did not come to hurt him. They did not come to add to his burden. Though they ended up doing that, didn't they? Let me give you something to Google sometime, if you're a Googler. Dumb things caring people say. Now, before you Google that, brace yourself, because on that list, you will probably see a few things that you've said and that I've said. Just because we have a caring heart doesn't mean we're going to minister perfectly. It takes more than that. It takes knowledge. I'm hoping when you walk out of here, by the end of the day tomorrow, if the Lord permits, you'll be more aware of how to effectively minister to people who are struggling. That it will not just help you, but it will help you help others. They came for the right reason, to mourn and comfort him. They eventually morphed into miserable comforters. But what happened between chapter 2 at the end and then them becoming miserable comforters? Well, they opened their mouth. That's what happened. Lesson learned. We need to be in their presence. The less said, the better. And we need to be very careful about what we do say. We need to be careful about the timing of it, the tone of it, the content of it. It all matters. We need to care. But we also need to know about how to minister to other people. That's why workshops like this, I think, are so valuable. If we have compassionate hearts, and I'm assuming we all do, that's not enough. We need to have knowledge. Effective ministry results from a math equation. Here's the math equation. Knowledge plus compassion equals effective ministry. That's a simple math problem. It takes two things. It takes more than a compassionate heart. It takes knowledge. Knowledge plus compassion equals effective ministry. If I don't know that somebody is struggling, even if I have a compassionate heart, I'm not going to help them because I don't know that they're struggling. If I don't know what they're struggling with, even if I have a compassionate heart, I am not going to effectively minister to them. We need knowledge and we need compassion. And when we have those two things, we can minister effectively to other people. Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar had never attended a Living with Lost workshop. They did instinctively, out of love and concern for their friend, what was really good. They dropped everything in their life and they came for the right reason. As a matter of fact, look at how they participated in this man's life. They raised their eyes from afar. They did not recognize him. They lifted their voices and they wept. Now, wait a minute. Doesn't the Bible say somewhere, grown men don't cry? Isn't that in there somewhere? That's what's called a chimney corner scripture. I don't know if you've ever heard that phrase or not. But anyway, grown men do cry when they have a heart. They raised their eyes from afar. They did not recognize him. They lifted up their voices and wept. Each one tore his robe, sprinkled dust on his head toward heaven. See, they're participating with him in the mourning process. Do you think that touched them? Do you think that affected their blood pressure? Do you think they struggled with that? It didn't matter. They were good friends. That's what good friends do. It says in verse 13 of chapter 2, so they sat down with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him. Now, these are 3 males. Guys, do you think 3 females could sit for 7 days in the presence of others and not say anything? I'm just kidding, ladies. Don't take me serious. Although, there has been research done, by the way. I want to throw this out. The typical woman says 30,000 words in a day. Typical male, 15,000. Now, one woman explained to me at one workshop, I forget where this was, she said, Dean, the reason why we say twice as much is the men don't listen to us and we have to keep saying it over and over again. So maybe she's right. They sat there and mourned with him because they saw that his grief was great. Yeah, he had life, a blessing. He had a God in heaven who loved him, knew what was going on inside of him and around him. He had great friends. But he's saying, full of trouble. Job, what are you thinking? Well, he's not thinking. He's feeling. When our feeler is running in overdrive, oftentimes our thinker is in park. Now, by the way, let me just throw this out. If he were to go to the doctor, you know when you go to the doctor, I don't. Why does my eye doctor need to know my marital status? I still have not figured that out. I went to the eye doctor a couple of months ago, and by the way, I had no idea there were so many different marital status. Matter of fact, I took a picture of it. I just couldn't believe it. But anyway, uh, if he would have gone to the eye doctor and had to identify his marital status, what would Job have said? What box would he have checked? He's married. Is that a blessing? Sure is. It's an unparalleled blessing. There's no blessing like it on planet Earth. Think about this. A person who's married, the vast majority of people who are married, now there are some rare exceptions, but the vast majority of people who are married went from stranger, they didn't even know that other person existed for years and years. They went from stranger to a one flesh relationship. Now, James Dobson has a word for that. He said, that's phenomenal. What a tremendous blessing. To have a person in your life that was a total stranger for years in your life. And that eventually morphed into a very unique one flesh relationship. That is a tremendous blessing. Do you know what I would give to have that blessing back? It's hard. It's hard when you lose that blessing. It's hard to live with the reality of losing that blessing. And I'll talk more about that tomorrow. He was married. Boy, we mentioned a number of blessings, and he said full of trouble. What's wrong with Job? Why did Job use such an extreme statement there? He was what? Hurting. Okay, he was hurting. Now, he was hurting physically because he had sores. You know, he lost his health, didn't he? I mean, he not only lost all the prosperity, he lost his health. So he's hurting physically. And when you're hurting physically, you also hurt emotionally and mentally because we're a package deal. So he's really hurting. Now, when you're hurting, you're feeling, aren't you? And when you're feeler, everybody has a thinker and a feeler. Now, we don't use our thinker as much as we should, but everybody has a thinker and a feeler. Everybody does. That's one thing that distinguishes us from the lower creatures of the animal kingdom that we oversee. We have a thinker and a feeler. And our feeler can be so strong sometimes in our life that we just don't think straight. There are people who write about their experience of life after loss, and they talk about a fog, about being in a fog. And that's a very good descriptive, because driving in a heavy fog is very scary. And sometimes you can be in a fog in your life because of something severe that you've experienced in your life. Now, Job was more blessed than he was burdened, even when he was severely burdened. We just listed several of his blessings, the most important of which was God. Now, Job snapped. Now, who can tell me, who remembers in the story about Job's wife snapping? What did Job's wife say to him when she just snapped? She said, "Curse God and die." Now, I want you to think about that for a minute. I know for a lot of years, how can you not take that negatively? You know, now, she was way out of line in when she said, "Curse God." But let me suggest to you something else. Do you know what it's like watching somebody you love suffer and the effect it has on you? And you can watch that kind of situation, especially as a caregiver, and I was for 8.5 years. When you see something like that, you can get to the point where you stop praying for their healing and their survival, and you pray the Lord will take them? That may have been a sympathetic petition that she was making there, hoping that her husband would die because it was killing her watching him suffer so severely. I find it interesting that God did not strike her with a bolt of lightning when she said that. He let her say that. He knew that she was suffering. When people are suffering, they will say and do things that are abnormal, that are inconsistent with who they are and their life. They'll do things radical, things that will just be so out of the box for them, so out of sorts for them, you just can't believe it. Now, let me suggest to you, when you're in the presence of somebody like that, just let them be in your presence. Don't try to correct them. Now, Job did. Job tried to correct her. Good-hearted Job. I will not teach the gospel to a drunk, because in his drunken state, he is incapable of receiving the gospel. I need to sober him up. And when he gets in his right mind, when he's sobered up, I'll teach him the gospel. But there's a time in his life when he's drunk, he's not able to receive the gospel, because it's a rational, intelligent story about a deep love a father has for his creation. When people are hurting, the best thing we can do is be with them and let them be them. Let them vent. Let them have their catharsis and just be with them. Don't leave them because it makes you feel uncomfortable. And I would encourage you, too, not to correct them, because they're in no condition to be corrected. Later down the road, maybe you can talk to them about something that they said and help them to reframe their thinking. But God knew that she was struggling, and he was struggling. And I'm so thankful that the Lord is way more long-suffering than I am. I mean, do you have anybody in your life that you have a short fuse with? I hope not everybody, but sometimes people can just, it's hard to be long-suffering toward others. God does not have that problem. Now, we put Job on a pedestal, and he deserves to be on a pedestal because he's amazing. But he was not perfect. Let me show you where Job snapped. Chapter 7, verse 6. Job 7, verse 6. Now, the first part of this verse, if you have any age on you, you will remember the first part of this verse. My days are swifter than a weaver's shuttle. In other words, they're fast. Now, what I never noted in this passage was the second half of this same verse. I never noticed this until recent years. My days are swifter than a weaver's shuttle and are spent without hope. Job said he was without hope. Was he without hope? He said he was without hope. Was he without hope? Who did we say he had God? He had God in his life, right? When you have God in your life, do you have hope? No matter what your circumstances are, you have hope. What do you have to work at? I love that. Your thinker has to be turned back on. Yeah. I had a mother-in-law who I just loved her dearly. She was more like my mother than actually my mother was. Sometimes she'd have a hard time going back to sleep at night. And I said, Mama Bear, I used to call her Mama Bear. Mama Bear, just turn your brain off. Just turn your brain off and then you'll be able to relax and go to sleep. And then it dawned on me one day, if God had put one of those buttons, think about what would have happened when we turned our brain off. Unless we told somebody else at a certain time later the next day to turn it back on, we'd never have it back on. But you just need to, sometimes what you need to do, you need to keep telling yourself something. Sometimes we need to have these things that we just keep telling ourselves. Let me tell you about something that I personally keep telling myself. Because life can really be a struggle sometimes. And so I memorized a song in our songbooks. I don't know if this church is familiar with singing this song or not. It's my favorite song. I had it sung at my wife's memorial service. I keep telling myself this. I'll orally say this out loud to myself on occasion. Often I'm hindered on my way, burden so heavy, I almost fall. Then I hear Jesus sweetly say, heaven will surely be worth it all. Heaven will surely be worth it all, worth all the trials that here befall. After this life, with all of its strife, heaven will surely be worth it all. I have to keep telling myself that because my feeler sometimes is shouting so strongly. I've got to constantly be reminding myself of what I need to keep in mind. Heaven is surely worth everything I experience in this life. But that's how hard life can be sometimes. It can get to the point where you begin to question that. You begin to wonder about it. And so you have to keep reminding yourself. There was never a time in Job's life when he was more burdened than he was blessed. But he had a hard time feeling it. Your feeler does not care about facts. Never let your feeler scream so loudly that you forget the facts. Our feeler does not care about facts. Your feeler is going to go wherever it wants to. We need to bring that feeler captive. We need to control our feelings. That's a part of the fruit of the Spirit, right? It's a part of the Christian graces, self-control. We need to have the ability to control our emotions. I was visiting with a young lady in Fort Mill, South Carolina, which is a suburb of Charlotte, North Carolina. And after the workshop on Sunday, I took her out to lunch and talked to her because I found out a little bit about her and I wanted to talk to her more. Her husband came to her. They had two twin boys, 9 years old. And her husband came to her one day and informed her that his mistress was going to deliver their child the next day. And I said to her, I said, did you slap him? She said, I did in my mind. Well, you know, there are times that we need to do things in our mind and let them be solely in our mind. You know, our emotions can be really strong, but we need to make sure that they do not dominate us. Well, we're all more blessed than we're burdened, even though we may not feel that way. The fact is, we are all more blessed than we're burdened. I hope you noted whenever we were praying together, I mentioned about the fact we got up out of bed. I assume we probably dressed ourselves. We drove here. If we didn't drive here, we were in a car and we got here safely. And you're able to be in public with other people, and there are other people who can't be. You know, it's amazing how blessed we are. The more specifically we think about our blessings, the more we will appreciate how richly blessed we are. Even though there are times when we suffer such great loss and it has such a powerful impact on us, wow, it shakes us up to the point where we wonder if life's worth living. And we feel as if life is so full of trouble. If I were to drink this bottle, we'll make this observation, then we'll take a break. If I were to drink this bottle down to 4 ounces, it claims to be 8 ounces. If I drank it, what is the verb there? Anyway, okay, you know what I mean. Okay, I'm halfway down, and the water's right here. What are we going to call this bottle when we look at it? What are we going to call it? Half full or half empty, or in what way is it full? If I drink the water right down to here, in what way is it full? What's it have in it? Air and water. All of our lives have blessings and burdens. All the time. They're blessings and burdens. Sometimes the burdens are real light and they hardly affect us. Other times they are super heavy and they alter our life. And we feel as if they're threatening our life. But the reality is we always have more blessings than we have burdens. Don't ever let your feeler tell you otherwise. Let's take a break. I need to stop just a moment and, oh yes, we definitely need to take a break. I noticed it's 10 o'clock. I want to take a picture of there. Let's take a 5-minute break. Because we do want to stay on point, on schedule, because I know you people have a life, and everybody needs to get up and stretch. I have a bell that my wife used whenever she needed help, whenever I was caregiving, and I bring that bell with me. So if you hear this, you know it's time to come back to class, okay? I know that keeping your attention focused is hard. I confess to struggling with that issue. As a matter of fact, if you ever Google studies that have been done about adult attention spans, it's very depressing. It would cause a good preacher to question whether or not he ought to keep preaching. It's hard to get people's attention. It's hard to keep people's attention, but thank you very much for showing me some really good attention, and thank you for participating in our time together. Sometimes we need reminders, and so I'm going to ask you to do something with me here for a little bit. I'm going to ask you to sing with me. We're going to sing all the verses of this song and only the chorus one time. Now, when we sing this song, I want you to be real careful to watch the words. Because let me tell you what we Christians do. We observe a Passover. Not like the Jews, but we do observe the Passover. We have a tendency to pass over passages in the Bible that we're familiar with because we've read them a million times. We have a tendency to pass over the lyrics of songs that are really impactful because we've sung them a million times. In light of what we've talked about this morning, I want you to think real carefully about the words we're going to be singing here as we sing this song.
When upon life's billows you are tempest tossed, when you are discouraged thinking all is lost, count your many blessings, name them one by one, and it will surprise you what the Lord hath done. Are you ever burdened with a load of care? Does the cross seem heavy you are called to bear? Count your many blessings, every down will fly, and you will be singing as the days go by. When you look at others with their limbs and praise God is over all. Count your many blessings, angels will attend. Help and comfort give you to your journey's end. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your blessings, see what God hath done. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your many blessings, see what God hath done.
You are richly, richly blessed. Never let your burdens blind you to the multitude and the quality, the value of the blessings in your life. Don't let that happen. Now, there's a problem with blessings. One of the problems with blessings is we can become very, very attached to them. Does anybody know the name of the boy whose tongue is stuck to the pole? Now, the reason why, don't Google that. Don't pick up your phone. If somebody knows, my family has a golden chest of prizes. And in this golden chest are priceless prizes. What my family likes to do is award people who have absolutely useless knowledge. Does anybody know the name of the boy whose tongue is stuck to the pole? Now later, not now, later you can go on YouTube and plug in your search bar, Triple Dog Dare. This is the Triple Dog Dare scene. Does anybody know the name of the movie? Okay, now that's too easy. I'm not giving you a present for that one. Do you know that that movie was filmed in 2 countries? Part of it was filmed, most of it was filmed in our country. Does anybody know where that movie was primarily filmed in our country? You must only have good knowledge, valuable knowledge. Nobody has useless knowledge. It was filmed in Cleveland, Ohio. As a matter of fact, that home is like a museum. It's really cool. I lived for decades in my life, about an hour south of Cleveland, Ohio. That's one of the reasons I know that. Does anybody remember the decade in which that movie came out? No, not the 40s. Not 70s. Who said 80s first? Oh, okay. You come over here now. I want you to come over here. 1983 is when that movie came out. Do you think that boy intended on getting his tongue stuck to the pole? What do you think? Yeah, probably not. Now, this is a really important decision for you to make, okay? I want you to make it a point of taking this back to where you're seated, and you can dig through it. Now, you still have to listen to me, okay? And then you have to let me take a picture of you with whatever you pick out of here, okay? Okay, we're going to take a selfie, okay? Okay, you take that back. Do not be asking for anybody's assistance. That's your decision. And there's nothing in there that will bite you.
I can look at it while you're talking?
Yes, but you still have to pay attention with your ears. Okay, now, what happens with blessings is we become attached to them. Sometimes we become unintentionally attached. Sometimes we become intentionally attached to blessings. Let me give you an example. For the first several years of my life, I did not go to church. I did not even know this when I was growing up, but my dad was an unfaithful Christian. But we never went to church, and we didn't read the Bible. We didn't go to church. Why would I have known anything about his past? Well, he grew up around Huntington, West Virginia, way out in the country, a place called Whites Creek, West Virginia. And when he left high school, he left home and he left the church. Years and years later, when I was about 14, 15 years old, he decided to come back to the Lord, and so we started going to church for the first time. I mean, I'd never read the Bible. If you would have asked me who Noah was, I would have said, that's my uncle. He lives in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Seriously, I knew nothing about the Bible. Well, at this place where we went to church, there was a girl that whenever I saw her, I began a journey with her where I became intentionally attached to her. I met her at 15. We married at 19. It was an intentional. It was not accidental. It was not unintentional. It was an intentional attachment. Sometimes we become intentionally attached to people or things. Sometimes over a period of time, we become unintentionally attached. Now, let me give you an example. Does anybody here have a dog? Okay, some of you are dog lovers. Okay, now, when we get a dog and we bring it home, it's a PET. What does it morph into over time? A CHILD. It becomes a part of your family, right? Time and experience causes that dog, that pet, to become family. Time and experience. You cultivate. It's a gradual thing. And I don't think most of us intentionally choose that to happen. It just kind of happens over time. They're just so lovable, right? Well, most of the time. They're so lovable. And we become attached to them. Now, what happens when you lose that blessing? Do you know there are pet cemeteries? I was in Goshen, Indiana, down the road from the church building. There was a pet cemetery. I was in Wiley, Texas, north of Dallas. I happened to look over to the right side when I was driving to the church building. I saw this cemetery and I thought, there's a lot of gas and oil people in Dallas. I thought, there's a lot of rich people buried there. No, that was a pet cemetery, is what that was. There's a lot of people in Dallas that have more money than sense, evidently. Now, let me tell you about this widow lady I met. She said her husband had 3 dogs, and those 3 dogs were really special to him. And he died. Now, as those dogs died, each of those 3 dogs died. After he died, she took them to the cemetery and buried them above him. Because out of respect for him and how attached he'd become to those dogs, she felt like that was the right thing to do. I thought that was really cool, really sweet, really loving that she would do something like that. She knew he was very attached to those dogs. She was very attached to the husband that was buried there. Now, sometimes we lose blessings that are so valuable that they really shake us up. There are people who grieve deeply when they lose their dog. And that's not anything to make fun of. They have become so attached that it's really shaken them up that their dog died. We need to understand that can happen. Now, here's what I want you to do. I want to open it up here. Name me something. Don't think about people now. Name me something a person could lose in their life that would shake them up and cause them to grieve. A job. A job? I mean, have you seen the statistics about how many jobs there are available? Now, we would, okay, let me tell you about Clyde. 39 years. He was a high-level accountant for the Firestone Tire and Rubber Company in Akron, Ohio, which was for years the rubber capital of the world. 39 years. He went in on Saturdays when he didn't have to. He was that conscientious of an employee. And they came in one day and said, Clyde, we're moving your job down to Nashville. Bridgestone, the Japanese, had bought Firestone. And they're going to move the headquarters down to Nashville. So they're moving Clyde's job down to Nashville. And he said, well, I don't want to move to Nashville. And they said, well, we don't want you to move to Nashville either. Hit the road, Jack. He didn't retire. He was retired. There's a difference. He was shook up. He was hurt. A great deal of his identity was he was a high-level accountant for Firestone Tire and Rubber Company. There are things sometimes we experience in this life that we permit to become our identity, and when we lose that part of our life, it shakes us up. Now, let me tell you what happened. My daughter happens to be now a high-level corporate accountant with Bridgestone in Nashville. You work for Bridgestone too? Oh, really? Okay. So my daughter said, Dad, things are a mess. They didn't train somebody to take Clyde's place um, well enough. And so they started complaining in Nashville. So they went back to Clyde. After they dumped him, months later, they go back to Clyde, the bigwigs, and they say, Clyde, we'd like to have you come back and work with us for a few months to get things to a better place. What do you think he said? Something like that. Yeah. He said, no way, Jose. You shafted me. I ain't helping you. He was mad. Not unlike people can become angry when they suffer great loss. Like this was a great loss for him, so he really struggled with this. So here, now, things continue to be a mess at Bridgestone down in Nashville. And Clyde told me this part. He said, Dean, they came back to me a second time. And they said, Clyde, what will it take to get you to come back to help us for a few months? And here Clyde said, Dean, I named a number. I knew they would not match. And they matched it. He had a big smile on his face when he was telling me this story. He didn't tell me the number, but he said it was a really big number. And so that helped his recovery from his loss. You know, it's hard sometimes. Give me something else that if a person lost it, it could really shake them up. Your home, okay. Now, what's the big deal about that? Because there's a thing called a Zillow app. I have a woman who lives in my phone. She's short and skinny, and I call her Miss Google. She knows stuff. I mean, she knows a lot of stuff. So if you give me your address, I can plug in your address, and I can see the overpriced value Zillow puts on your home. Just recently, I saw the overpriced value Zillow puts on my home. And when I looked at it, I said, if I can find somebody to pay me that money, I'm out the door. It's just money. What's your house? You got wood, shingles, you got glass. Really, what's the big deal about losing your home? Why is your home a big deal? The memories. What are the memories of? Family, people. Now, this is going to be pretty remarkable. I think this could help you the rest of your life. It's helped me since I came to realizing this. Life in 3 words. I'm thinking about starting a podcast, and that podcast is going to be the 3-word podcast. I can reduce life to 3 words, and here it is. Life in 3 words: people, relationships, and experiences. That's your life right there. People, relationships, and experiences. That's life. Why is your home so important? It's not because of the wood, the shingles, the glass, or the monetary value. It's the sentimental, personal value you place on that home because of the people who you had experiences with, who you cultivated relationships with in that house. That's what makes that house priceless, irreplaceable. And that's why we're blown away when a hurricane, a fire, a tornado comes and destroys our home. And by the way, in your home now, what in your home is irreplaceable? What could you never possibly replace? The pictures. What's a picture? A picture is a piece of paper. It's like cardstock, like a 3x5 card. Now, what is that piece of paper, and why in the world is it so valuable? Memories. What's the memories of? What's on those pictures? People, relationships, and experiences. That's what makes those pictures valuable. That's what puts value to a worthless piece of paper. People, relationships, experiences. Give me something else that if we lost it, it might shake us up. Our wedding ring. Now, wait a minute. There's a jeweler up in Elizabethton, Tennessee, and he has 3 jewelry stores. He's an elder in the Lord's church there. If you were to lose your wedding ring, we could get you another wedding ring by contacting Dempsey Jordan. What is the big deal about losing your wedding ring? Your husband picked it out. Your husband gave it to you. And what did it represent? His love. People, relationships, and experiences. Yeah, even things can matter. When somebody loses their marriage by divorce, warning to every single one of us. We need to realize that they have suffered great loss and they need sympathy. No matter what the reason for the divorce. And I'm not suggesting you can get a divorce for any reason. I don't believe that. I know that's not the case in the eyes of God. I'm just saying that when a person loses their marriage by divorce, they have lost a great blessing. They need to realize, and we need to realize, there's grief that goes with divorce. Because the blessing of marriage is an unparalleled blessing. We need to respect that. We need to minister to those people who have experienced divorce. Anybody here been diagnosed with cancer? You lost your health, didn't you? Shakes you up, doesn't it? Boy, I'll tell you what. Well, when I was in West Tennessee, and I had a nurse practitioner in Jackson, Tennessee, I decided, he was a member of the church, the Estes Church in Chester County, Tennessee. Because he was a brother in the Lord, I decided one morning, when I finally got in that little room where he's going to come in, I thought as soon as he comes in, I'm going to ask him a question. I'm not going to greet him. As soon as he walked in, I said, "Hey, Brett, when do people appreciate their health?" What do you think he said? When they lose it. That'll shake you up, won't it? My wife was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. People get diagnosed with cancer, with ALS, Crohn's disease. There's a brother out in Oklahoma who I admire greatly. Helton is his last name, Helton. He has a ministry, he created a ministry called Broken and Mended. And it's a ministry where he is ministering to people literally all over the world who have life-altering, everyday struggle with their health. He lost his health. He grieved about that, and then he chose to use that experience of loss to minister to other people. Isn't that neat how we can do that? Think about a person who has a diabetic condition that's so severe that they have to have a leg removed. The loss of a leg, do you think anybody would grieve that? See, we're trying to look at this more broadly. They've lost something of great value. They've lost a leg. My heart bleeds for godly parents who've poured their heart and soul into their children, but their children have not chosen to follow Jesus. My heart grieves for parents who have poured their heart and soul into their children, who then became Christians, who then they have lost to the world or to the devil. That is a severe loss. The young lady who goes to a college campus and she's raped has lost her virginity in that violent experience. Do you think she's going to grieve? The young lady, the godly young lady, who loves the Lord sincerely, but in a moment of passion, gifts her virginity to her boyfriend. Do you think she's going to grieve? See, just because we're faithful Christians doesn't mean we can't sin in ways that are beyond anything we ever imagined. I really don't think David, the man after God's own heart, had plans to do what he did with Bathsheba. But it can happen to anybody. When we lose our innocence in our relationship with God, there needs to be deep grieving. I wish more and more we would think about sin, not just from the perspective of breaking God's will, but breaking God's heart. Maybe we'd grieve more about the sin that intrudes into our life. I could go on and on and on about so many things. Jesus said in Matthew 6:21, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Your heart follows your treasures. Matthew 6:21. When you lose something that you treasured, it's going to have an effect on you. It's called grief. It's what human beings do when they lose things of great value. And you know what? It's going to do a number on you. It's going to shake you up. You're going to think things you've never thought before. If it was a big loss, you're going to feel things you've never felt before. You may even begin to question, am I going crazy? You can't sleep at night. Some people, the other extreme. They constantly want to sleep. You can feel so desperate that you can even be tempted to do things that are way outside of your thought processes in the past. An older gentleman came to me in Chester, West Virginia, and he said, Dean, you'll see it tomorrow evening. I started a list of things that could possibly accompany great loss, especially the loss of your spouse. And he said, Dean, on that list you've got, he said, I'd like to recommend something else. And I said, well, what's that? And he said, suicidal thoughts. I would guess him to be in his early 80s, and I could see his eye begin to fill up with excess fluid. Yeah, when you suffer great loss, it'll do a number on you. And just remember what we said earlier. Your feeler doesn't care about facts. Your feeler doesn't care about what you know. That's why you cannot let your feeler be the dominant in your life. That's why we need to think and we need to prepare ourselves for the experience of loss so that we can think through it and not just feel through it. There's a book written by William Bridges, who is a worldwide expert on change. The book that I'm referring to here is a book called Transitions, just one word, Transitions. The subtitle is Making Sense of Life's Changes. He goes all over the world helping organizations, companies, navigate transitions in their existence. That book is outstanding. It would have helped me when I was a local preacher to be a much better preacher, leader in the Lord's church, and help church families navigate the transitions that we experience as church families in our local environments. Now, I'm going to save you about 200 pages of reading with 2 slides. Here's the first slide. What he talks about in that book is he talks about change, and he talks about how that we all experience change, and that's a part of the world that we live in. Some of the change is chosen, some of the change is forced. Like I talked to Lane yesterday, and I found out that he went to North Carolina State of the Wolfpack, and he ends up here. Well, he chose to come here, and that was a relocation. That was a chosen change. Now, some of you sitting here have experienced the loss of somebody in your life. That was not a chosen change. That was something that life forced on you. And that's hard. That's hard to deal with. Now, life is real sweet sometimes because life will gift us. Here's that book, by the way, Transitions, Making Sense of Life's Changes. Life, as we live, often gifts us great blessings. When I was 15 years old, my life gifted me interaction with a beautiful girl that became my wife at age 19. And life gifted me with 3 amazing children. Girls, they're all faithful members of the Lord's church. They're all married to faithful members of the Lord's church. Life gifted me 5 grandchildren, 4 girls and 1 boy. Life's gifted me really good health. Life gifted me churches that were willing to tolerate me, and one church for 33 years let me be their minister in Hartville, Ohio. That was a beautiful gift. I have been so gifted. But then sometimes life gifts you things you don't want. Here you go. Here's sickness. Well, I don't want to be sick. Life, I don't want to be sick. Life doesn't care what you think. Life doesn't care what you feel. Life doesn't care what you want. Sometimes life will say, here's cancer. Try that on for size. Or life will say, here's the loss of your child. I don't want to lose my child. Life doesn't care about that. Here's unemployment. Here's financial disaster. Here's the loss of your home. There's stuff that life gives us that we don't want. So what do you women do when you get this is confession time. I'll be the priest. This will be the confessional. Okay, you women now, confess, because these men don't have a clue about what you do, okay? What do you women do when you get a gift you don't want? You can return it. Okay? Now, guys, these women are really smart, and they're really creative. That's just one thing. There's all kinds of stuff they do. Now, you can return it, but women, what else could you do? You could re-gift it. Yeah. Okay, now, when life gifts you a burden, can you re-gift it? Can you return it? You're stuck with it. Now, you ladies, what else could you do with it? Put it away. Throw it away. Now, if you did that, out of sight, out of mind, right? Can you do that with loss? You're stuck with it. You have to learn to live with it. That's why I call these workshops Living with Loss. There are things that life gifts you that you just have to learn to live with. You would never, ever re-gift it to somebody else. You do not have the ability to stick it somewhere and forget about it or throw it away. You have to deal with it. I'll give you one. Widower. Now, tomorrow, if the Lord permits, I'll tell you a little bit more about that particular marital status. But I didn't choose for my wife to die on Christmas morning of 2013, but she did. At 9:40 in the morning, I watched her draw her last breath. Life gifted us her Parkinson's disease and her quick deterioration for a Parkinson's patient, 8.5 years from diagnosis to death. We just had to deal with it. There were many, many days that was not fun. There were many, many days that it was frustrating, it was exhausting, and it caused me to snap. We have to learn to deal with things that life gifts us that we're just stuck with. Now, sometimes with a cancer diagnosis, you can get your health back. Or there's sometimes financial disaster. You can work really hard, the Lord can bless your efforts, and you can maybe rebuild yourself and maybe even get to a better place than you were before. But there are some things in life that you lose that you will forever have to live with the rest of your life. Like if you get a divorce. If you get a divorce, that's going to be a part of your story the rest of your life. Even if you were to marry again, the reality is you still went through that divorce. If you lose a child, you're going to have to live with that reality the rest of your life. I'm going to have to live with the reality that after 41 years, I lost my wife to Parkinson's disease. It was hard. And some days, still hard. And I hate it. But I have to deal with it. I don't have any choice. I can't do anything about it except react to it because it's something that's out of my control. I have to learn to live with it. And that's the way we need to do. Well, whenever change occurs, what also that launches is a new beginning. However, here's what we don't understand that causes us a lot of added grief. Whenever my wife died, that was a forced change. I became a widower, but what I did not realize was between my change and new beginning, I was going to be in a forest for who knew how long. Now let me explain to you about this forest. It's the forest between your change, your forced change in the case of loss, and your new beginning. This is a forest where there are no footprints and no pathway. You know, in a forest, if you kind of feel like you're lost, then you find a path and you follow that path until it leads you somewhere. Because you know it leads somewhere because somebody's already been there. But this forest that you're in your life, there's no footprints and there's no pathway. But what's weird about it is there's people. During this phase in your life, there are going to be people. Some of these people, a few of them might be helpful to you, encouraging and stick with you. Inevitably, though, you're going to interact with people who are not going to be helpful. Some of them are going to be negligent. They're going to pass by on the other side when you're really hurting bad. And then there are other people during this forest time in your life that they're going to be hurtful. Hopefully not deliberately. The 3 friends of Job. That was not deliberate. They came to mourn and comfort. They thought they were doing the right thing. And there are people who are going to say things to you when you are suffering great grief that are going to add to your grief. Let me tell you about this lady who finally, after losing her husband, she finally decided to go to the grocery store for the first time. She went to the grocery store, and as she was pushing the cart in the grocery store, she interacted with an older lady, older than her, who was also a member of the same church she was. And the older lady said to this new widow, "Why are you here? You don't have anybody to cook for." That younger of the 2 widows just turned her cart, pushed down the aisle, and started crying. Now, there's no doubt in my mind but that older lady had no intention of hurting her. She just said what she thought. And that's why we need knowledge. Knowledge plus compassion equals effective ministry. She did not effectively minister to that person. She hurt that person even more. Coming to a young lady who's lost her child prenatally, and she suffered a miscarriage, and putting your arm around that young lady and saying, "Honey, you're young, you can get pregnant again. Stop." Number one, do you know that she can get pregnant again? She may not be able to get pregnant again. Stop. Number two, she does not need to be thinking about another child. Her total focus of attention needs to be on that child she has lost, that was conceived within her, that she began to carry, and she had great hopes and dreams for. She needs to mourn that loss. She doesn't need to be thinking about another child. Stop. In a grief-illiterate world, we often say things and we do things that are not helpful. They can even be hurtful. Stop. That's why we need to learn more about these things. What William Bridges calls this is the neutral zone. The neutral zone is the time that begins when the change begins to be experienced until the time that you become more settled. You kind of get your feet under you again. Now, take, for instance, a couple who gets up here and they both say, I do, and they go from being single to being married. So that's a change, right? Hopefully it was not a shotgun wedding and it was a chosen change, okay? So a chosen change has occurred. Now, how long is it going to take for them to kind of get settled and to get their rhythm as a couple? It's going to take a while. They're in a time of transition. They legally have gone from single to married, but they have a lot of adjusting to do. The neutral zone is a time of adjustment after you begin to experience change. And we just need to be really patient with ourselves and patient with others. We're not going to be ourselves. We're going to struggle with this a whole lot. We're going to deal with some people who are going to be hurtful or neglectful, and there are some people who are going to be helpful. We need to be among the helpful to help other people if we know about grief and about the effect of grief. One of the most important things to learn about living with loss is you got to be patient with yourself, because you're going to experience things, you're going to think and feel things that are just going to be so abnormal that you're going to question yourself and question your life and question others. The most important thing that we need to realize with living with loss is we need the Lord. Yeah, we need to be patient with ourselves, but one thing that helps us to be patient with ourselves isn't just a knowledge about the impact of loss, but also what we need to learn is our need for the Lord. When do you feel a need for your Lord? When you get your dream job? When you get a big raise? When you find somebody in your life you can share the rest of your life with? When you move into the home that you would have loved to have lived in for years in your life? We think most about our need for the Lord when we crash and burn, when we really struggle. Now, I'm not suggesting that we can't feel a need for the Lord when we're prospering. I'm just suggesting that the most passionate people who sing, I need thee, oh, I need thee, every hour I need thee, are people who are going through a very difficult time in their life. One of the blessings of the burden of loss is an in-your-face reminder, I need the Lord. My life changed dramatically, caregiving. My prayer life changed dramatically in both caregiving and my wife's death and the years afterwards. I highly recommend when people suffer great loss, pour more effort into your relationship with the Lord than you ever have before, because you need them more than you've ever had before. We need to learn to lean on the Lord and wait on Him. I love the humility of David. When my heart is overwhelmed, lead me to the rock that's higher than I. David recognized that he needed the Lord. That same thing is what we need. Whenever you suffered great loss, here's my recommendation. Take what you've suffered and turn it into a blessing. Use it to promote your personal growth and use it to help other people. Batsell Barrett Baxter, who only a few of us probably in this room would remember that name, wrote a book called When Life Tumbles In, and in that book, I want to read a quote. When we must carry heavy burdens, we receive our greatest help not from those who, having never carried similar burdens, stand on the sidelines and give bland advice, but from those who have been through the same valleys and have suffered the same problems. Who's going to help the cancer patient who is thinking about chemotherapy treatments and surgeries that are in their future? Who's going to help that person more than anybody else? Somebody who's already gone through it. Who's going to help the person who's lost their child to the world and is agonizing, scared to death for the spiritual welfare of their children? Who's going to help that person most? How about another parent who's been there and done that? Who's going to help the person who's lost their spouse? And by the way, don't ever say, I know how you feel. Nothing worse. Nothing more insulting could be said to somebody going through a hard time than, I know how you feel. Never permit those words to come from your lips, because you do not and you cannot know how they feel. Everybody lives in their own skin. Everybody has had their unique experiences. I told you about the lady who said, when I asked her, did you slap him? And she said, in my mind, I did. Well, I think there are a lot of widowed people that I've met who've done a lot of slapping of a lot of people in their mind, because they've had somebody say to them, had the gall to say to them, I know how you feel. No, you don't. You cannot. See, the more we learn, the more capable we are of handling our loss, and the more capable we are of helping other people. Now, I'm going to take a risk of letting you have 2 or 3 minutes to stand up while they change to the next set of slides, which are called What Grief Does to Us. If you would, let's stand up and just take a couple of minutes, because here's the reason why. I'm committed to ending on time, which is 11:30. So if you would just stand up and take a break, because I know that it's hard to sit there and it's hard to keep attention for all the time that we are expecting of you. Let me make an announcement that I should have made earlier. Bucky travels with me everywhere I go. There are 2 tables out there in the foyer. One is a display table that has a bunch of books on it that were very helpful to me, have been and continue to be very helpful to me. And then there's another table out there that is about the ministry and has some articles that you may want to look at that have been printed about the Widowhood Workshop Ministry, which, again, is my family's passion project. Now, Bucky is my favorite beaver buddy. Now, he's the only beaver buddy I have. But anyway, Bucky travels with me. Now, out there, if you did not notice, there's a tray. And in that tray, there are 2 things. If you need sweetened up a little bit, there are candies out there. And feel free to pick up candy out there. And even while we're talking, if you want to just stand up a moment and go out there and get something, that's fine. Now, in addition to the candies, Bucky also brings individually wrapped prunes. Now, the reason why Bucky does that is we want to ensure that every workshop is a moving experience. So, if you can't be moved in one way, we want to help you be moved in another way. So feel free to take either one or both if you would like. Just make sure that if it's an individually wrapped prune, you kind of time when you choose to partake of that. That would be good. Okay, I would like for us to talk about what grief does to us, and we're going to finish at 11:30, just as we promised. Let me begin the session by apologizing. There's no way in the world, sometimes I have to go too fast with this. There's no way in the world, in a full workshop, I have a lot more material. You're kind of getting like an appetizer, sort of. But no church has ever given me enough time. It's not possible, I don't think, to practically be able to do that. There's so much that can be done in regard to this issue. So there are sessions that I delete. Like I have a session where we talk about hope in loss. Can you have hope in loss. In your loss, can you have hope? I have another session about marriage after loss. Marriage after loss is a very difficult and very personal issue to struggle with. I have another session about ministering to people who are suffering. So there are so many things I can't talk about, but what I do is I basically ask the church, how much time can you give me? And then I'll do the best I can to use effectively the time they give me. So that's where I always choose to go. I don't want to be domineering or requiring a certain amount of time or days with the church. I just want to go and be of whatever help that they'd like for me to try to be of benefit to them. So that's the way that I roll with this. So sometimes I kind of have to push it. So thank you for coming back when you did. And today this will be our last lesson, our last session. What does grief do to us? Well, I want to explain, again, this is my family's passion project. One thing that we do is we host an annual widowhood retreat. Now we have camps for kids, right? And we have married seminars and retreats for married people that, by the way, single people cannot go to, widowed people do not go to, but married people go to. We have ladies' days, and y'all don't let men go. And after my wife died, I thought, why don't we have a widowhood retreat exclusively for widows and widowers? My family hosts every July a national widowhood retreat in Middle Tennessee, Laverne, Tennessee, between Nashville and Murfreesboro on I-24. We invite widowed people from all over the country to come. We've had people come that have been widowed in their 20s. We have had attendees over 90 years old. This picture was taken just this past July. We had 168 widowed people there from 18 different states. I mean, they fly in from the state of Washington, Southern California, Texas. I even let people from Michigan come. And I'm from Ohio, and I let Michigan people come. Florida, we've had people come from Florida, but what we do, it has one purpose. It's all about one purpose. It's all about encouragement. So we have this special weekend of encouragement for widowed males and females, and what our purpose is, what my family's purpose is to treat those people like royalty, because they are often ignored in our culture and even in our churches. I'm thankful that Lane was telling me that there is a deacon over the widowed and the orphans. Not all churches have that blessing. But this is my family. My family's passion project is the Widowhood Workshop Ministry. And if you are widowed, we want you to feel free to come and be with us next year, July 18 through 20 in Laverne, Tennessee. We're looking forward to very soon breaking the 200 number when it comes to attendees at this event. Now, here's the way it happens in life. We are born into this world and we live, and that eventually what happens is we start loving stuff and people. We become attached to them, and then we suffer loss. And that's what causes us to be a mess, and we struggle. Now, what's really a sad reality is we never get to keep our blessings as long as we would like. I was reminded of this in Prescott, Arkansas, Sunday morning after church. I was out in the foyer. I interacted with this elderly lady who was pushing a walker. I started interacting with her and talking to her, and I found out she's legally blind. She lives alone. She is brought to church by a member of the church there, and she is a very faithful member of the church. I found out that she had been married, and I said, well, how long were you married? Because she talked about it in the past tense. So I assumed that she was widowed. And I said, well, how long were you married? And she said, not long enough. And I said, well, how long is not long enough? She said 63 years. So you don't get to keep your blessings as long as you'd like. And we need to realize that. And in realization of that, we need to be more grateful for what we have while we have it, because very likely we're going to lose it before we want to. One of the things that grief does is it confuses our thinker. I wrote 3 books about widowhood. They're out there on the ministry table. You can buy them from Amazon if you'd like. If you do Kindle reading, you can buy them for $5 a piece through Amazon Kindle. But those 3 books are available out there if you'd like. Before I finish the 3rd book, After the End Comes, they're all about marriage and the loss of marriage. One's called Before the End Comes, one's called When the End Comes, and one is called After the End Comes. Well, I thought I finished the manuscript on After the End Comes, and I sent it to Cindy Bostic in Apple Valley, California. I had met her when I was out there doing a workshop. Very impressed with her. I sent her the manuscript. I said, give me some feedback. She gave me some feedback, and then she said, Dean, maybe before you put that book to print, you ought to get this book called The Grieving Brain. She said, I just found it. I just read it. It's an outstanding book. I'm so thankful she recommended it. The Grieving Brain is a book written by a neuroscientist who for years has studied the effect of grief on the brain. She's also a psychologist, a therapist. She has experience both as a therapist in doing grief counseling, and she has experience and knowledge as a neuroscientist. She's done the MRIs, the CAT scans, the therapy sessions. For decades, she studied the effect of grief on the brain. The way I would describe it, though maybe she wouldn't appreciate me dumbing it down like this, you know, I'm a big football fan, a sports fan generally, but especially football. You know, in football, there's a concussion protocol. You have a head injury, and we recognize that that's a head injury, so we need to let that person recover from that head injury. Grief is kind of like an injury to your brain. It does confuse your thinker. It's kind of like an injury to the brain, and you've got to realize, and we've got to realize with other people that we're trying to help, that their thinker is confused. And they're going to struggle with that for probably a long time. I'm going to read to you a section of this book. And as I read this, I'm going to bring up a part that you can see. Even when a person has been ill for a long time, no one knows what it will be like to walk through the world without that other person. My contribution as a scientist has been to study grief from the brain's perspective, from the perspective that the brain is trying to solve a problem when faced with the absence of the most important person in our life. Grief is a heart-wrenchingly painful problem for the brain to solve, and grieving necessitates learning to live in the world with the absence of someone who you love deeply, who's ingrained in your understanding of the world. This means that for the brain, your loved one is simultaneously gone and also everlasting, and you are walking through 2 worlds at the same time. You are navigating your life despite the fact that they've been stolen from you, a premise that makes no sense and that is both confusing and upsetting to your brain. Your brain's messed up. Your brain's had like a concussion. Here's how she begins, a lot of times, her grief therapy. She says, imagine a night when you go to bed and you're in a deep sleep. And as you're in a deep sleep, somebody has the suspicion that you have something of value in a dining room table. And they find this out, and they break into your house in the night when you're sound asleep. And they steal your dining room table, and you don't know it. After they have left the house, you get up, you wake up, and you're thirsty. And you get up and you go to get a drink of water. And you pass through the dining room table. And as you pass through the dining room, as you pass through your dining room, right where your hip should hit the side of the dining room table, it doesn't. And your brain immediately responds. Because your brain has gotten used to that dining room table being right there in that room, and your hip should have hit the corner of that dining room table, but it doesn't. And your brain reacts to what is not there. Now your brain reacts to what's there. Remember me mentioning about if somebody turned a lion loose in the building? Your brain would immediately react because of something you saw or heard. She said your brain also reacts when something is not any longer there, but your brain has gotten used to it being there. The absence of a person in our life. Not being able to see that person. Not being able to touch that person. Not being able to smell that person. Not being able to sit down and eat with that person. Not being able to go in the car with that person. Your brain is going to struggle with that. It's going to take a good while to recover. See, grief isn't just an emotional thing. That's what we typically think, that grief is an emotional thing. Well, yeah, it's very emotional, but it's a mental thing. Grief confuses your thinker. That's why we're told a lot of times, don't make any big decisions. You might hear for at least a year. Maybe somebody might say, for the first couple of years. That's good advice. We've got to realize that it confuses our thinker. Now, what makes it even more difficult, this grief thing, is it messes with our feeler. So now not only is our thinker confused, our feeler is being messed with, and that's a problem. Because our feeler can be really strong and really dominant. James Dobson is a man that I have loved and appreciated for many years. His ministry, Focus on the Family, is headquartered in Colorado Springs, Colorado. I've been on the campus of that ministry twice. I'm just so impressed with what he's done with his life. He's written a book, among many books that he's written a book called Emotions, Can You Trust Them? Now what was funny to me was, one or two books later, he confessed that he could reduce that book about emotions to one word. Remember what I said was the title? Emotions, Can You Trust Them? What's the answer? No. He finally admitted that in a later book, after he had sold millions. Here's a quote from him. We must understand that emotions, boy, this is so true, are unreliable and at times tyrannical. Your emotions can become so dominant that you can't think straight. Job said, man that's born of woman is a few days and full of trouble. No, Job, your life was not full of trouble. Your feeler told you that. But the fact is, you have a God in heaven who loves you. You have a woman, and you're able to experience the tragedies that you're experiencing with someone else. That makes a huge difference. You're blessed. You had three men who stopped everything and came into your life and wanted to minister to you. You are richly blessed, Job. But see, he wasn't feeling it. Full of trouble. He said, my days are swifter than a weaver's shuttle and are spent without hope. No, Job, you have hope because you have God. Romans 15:13 says, God is a God of hope. He is always a God of hope. It doesn't matter what's going on in your life, how awful your circumstances are. You have hope when you have God. But boy, your emotions will shout so loudly that you can't believe that. But yes, you can. If you control your feeler and not let it become your dictator. Why do young people, when they have something to celebrate, do stupid things? For instance, I was the part of a local school system in Northeast Ohio for a number of years as a volunteer. One of the things I was on was the Drug Advisory Council. We were overseeing the drug education for the program in school to help kids to not get involved with illicit drugs. And one of the things that we were concerned about was when they, in the springtime, when they graduate from high school, going stupid. And they'll start having these parties where there's alcohol, and they'll start engaging in things that they shouldn't engage in. Now, they're rightfully celebrating because that's a time in life to celebrate graduation from high school. However, because they're in a celebratory spirit, they'll do things that otherwise they would not even think about doing. And I'm sure that, don't be naive, by the way, in regard to life and the world in general. We also came to realize that there were kids who, celebrating their high school graduation, were renting hotel rooms. And they were engaging in sexual immorality. They were thrilled. They were in a time of ecstasy because they were finally getting out of school. See, people, when they're doing positive things and enjoying super positive things, the feeler can just go weird and promote them doing things that they shouldn't be doing, that if they were thinking, they wouldn't do. Now, imagine the flip side, something awful happens, and your feeler is dominated because it's reacting to the awful thing that you're experiencing. You can become discouraged, disappointed. You can become desperate. You could do something that could harm you or harm others. There's a book called, out there on the display table, Widower to Widower. It's one of the first books I saw written by a man about the loss of his spouse for the benefit of other men who lose their spouse. And in that book, one of the things he confessed was, in the early stages, he said his greatest concern was doing something that might be harmful to him or his family. Our feelings can really drive us to behave in ways that are just not normal for us. What does grief do to us? Well, it confuses our thinker. It messes with our feeler. And that's the explanation for why we're so weird and so strange and feel so abnormal when we're grieving. Anybody here ever been in an intensive care unit? Oh, yeah. Okay, why do people get put in intensive care? What's the purpose of that? Regina? Emergency. Well, why can't they be taken care of in a regular room? Okay, things have escalated, and they're in more jeopardy now with their health, so they get moved to intensive care. Now, in intensive care, what's different there? More care. Have you ever asked, next time, I used to do this as a local preacher often. When I was visiting in the hospital, I loved interacting with nurses. I always told them, I tried to remind them, what they're doing is important. I wanted to encourage them. And sometimes I would ask them, what's the nurse-patient ratio typically on your shift? It can be kind of shocking if you ask that question. But you get in intensive care, and things are different. Sometimes it's one-on-one care. Now, why do they put somebody in intensive care? Because they need special help. When you've suffered great loss, you know what you need? You need to realize that you are in an intensive care phase of your life. You need to accept that. If I hear one more man, and typically it's south of the Mason-Dixon line, cut me some slack, I'm a Yankee, okay? Say, well, Dean, you just got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Have you ever thought about how arrogant that is? Where's God in that philosophy? Where's dependence upon our Father in heaven, who can help us better than anybody else? It's not there. That's a very arrogant perspective. I've got a daughter who loves to push my buttons. By the way, it's not Michelle. It's the youngest one. She's the problematic one. By the way, do you know what the youngest child can say? Whenever the siblings get mad at them because they're always treated special because they're the youngest and they're loved more than the other, they can always say, well, all I know is our parents kept having children until they had the perfect one. And that's the end of this discussion. Well, my youngest daughter will sometimes push my button and she'll say, Dad, I've got this. She knows that every time I say, even when I say that, I feel this tingling in my arms, and I'm not having a heart attack that I know of. I've got this. Now, she likes to do that to just aggravate me. Now, have you ever thought about how arrogant that statement is? Now, she's just playing with me. She's not being arrogant. Let me tell you a different philosophy. God's got this, and I've got God, and this is going to be okay. I don't know how, and I don't know when, but this is going to be okay. God's got this, and I've got God. This is going to be okay. That is the humble spirit of a dependent child in regard to the loving Father in heaven. That's how we need to live life when we crash and burn. We need to recognize that there are phases in our life where we don't just need to recognize our need for help, we need to be willing to ask for help. It is okay to ask for help. 1 John 4:8 says God's love. Following that passage, we are encouraged to love one another. When we refuse to let people help us, we are thwarting God's will for His love to be shared among His creatures, especially His people. Just like when we love others and we find ourselves blessed by loving and serving others, we need to let others be blessed by loving and serving us. Don't be so arrogant as to think that you got this, because you don't. Grief also prompts us to wonder why. It's the natural, normal thing for a human being to do when an awful thing happens. We wonder why. Now, don't you find it interesting that we don't react that way when we get our dream job, we move into our dream home, we marry the person of our dreams, we get a big raise, we have an opportunity to move to a certain location of the country where we've always wanted to live. Do we ask why when we're richly blessed? Well, we're really good at asking why when things crash and burn. Why don't we ask the same question when we're richly blessed? It's not wrong to ask the question why. I know that because in the Bible, great men of God have asked this question. Job asked this question, and because of time, I need to be real careful not to dwell on this a whole lot. But in the book of Job, let me read you just a few. In Job chapter 3, just to give you an example, verse 11 beginning, here's what he says. Why did I not die at birth? Can you imagine somebody being that bad? A great man of God. This is not your garden variety human, okay? This is a great man of God. Why did I not die at birth? Why did I not perish when I came from the womb? Why did the knees receive me, or why the breast that I should nurse? Verse 20 of chapter 3. Why is light given to him who is in misery, and life to the bitter of soul? Verse 23 of chapter 3. Why is light given to a man whose way is hidden, and whom God has hedged in? Why? If a great man of God, in great loss, would ask the question why, don't be surprised if those of us who are lesser men and women of God, we might ask the same question. It's not a sin to ask the question. The psalmist asked that question in Psalm 74. Gideon is my favorite one. Now, I'm going to quote you Judges chapter 3, verse 13. Now, listen real carefully to this, and I want to ask you this question. What does this tell you about Gideon and his thinking about God and when God is with us? Okay, here's the question. If the Lord is with us, why is all this happening to us? In Judges chapter 6, Israel is suffering greatly. They're suffering greatly. And he says, if the Lord is with us, why is all this happening to us? What does that tell you about his thinking about if the Lord is with us? What does he expect? Oh, good. If the Lord's with you, he's omnipotent. He's all-powerful. He's omnibenevolent. He loves. Well, if the Lord's with us, why in the world are we suffering the way we are? See, even Gideon wondered that question. Now, by the way, the answer to his question is they were being unfaithful to God. God was disciplining them by letting another nation come and punish them, hopefully to bring them back to him. But Job was clueless about the big picture. It's not uncommon to ask why. Jeremiah was one of the most persecuted prophets. He asked the same thing. Why in the world, Lord, did you have me be born to go through all this agony? Now, Jesus wasn't just pretty good. He was absolutely perfect. What question did he ask on the cross? Why have you forsaken me? Even Jesus. It's not a sin to ask why. However, though we're prompted to wonder why, we're probably really going to struggle with the fact that we're not going to get an answer. H. Norman writes, one of the greatest feats of life is learning to live without answers. Does anybody here, any of you heard of, now he's passed on to his reward now, Charles Hodge from Texas? Oh, he has some classic one-liners. And one of his statements I heard, I saw him in an article, he expressed this. He said, faith does not give us the answers. Faith gives us the ability to live without answers. He's right. Faith does not give us the answers. Faith gives us the ability to live without answers. There are things that we're always going to wonder about. That song that we sing, that tempted and tried, we're oft made to wonder why it should be thus all the day long. And then there's a part of the lyric that says, why others prosper. And here we are struggling. It is going to prompt us to wonder why. But let me tell you what is the million-dollar question. People obsess about this question, why? And it's totally human to do that. But and people look at it as the million-dollar question. If I knew the answer to this question, the question why, I'm going to be better capable of handling this. Well, you're still going to have to handle it. So do you have to know the answer to the question why? Why is not the million-dollar question. Let me give you the million-dollar question. It's another three-letter word. The million-dollar question is who? Who loves you more than anybody else? Who knows better than anybody else what's going on around you and inside of you? Who can provide for everything you need as you struggle in this storm of your life better than anybody? Who will never leave you nor forsake you? Do you know the answer to that question? See, there's the million-dollar question. And we know the answer to that question. But isn't this hard? Isn't this so hard to embrace some of the very things that we're talking about? Grief is a very, very powerful experience in our life that we experience when we suffer loss. The greater the loss, the greater the grief, and the greater the struggle. It's going to affect us mentally, emotionally, psychologically, socially, physically, even spiritually. Hopefully tomorrow we'll have a chance to talk about, just briefly, about the spiritual struggle. There are people who struggle spiritually and start having questions, things they wonder about regarding God, the Bible, their church family. It mentions socially. The typical widowed person in our culture, when they lose their spouse, loses 75% of their social network. They don't know what to do with you. We can make people feel uncomfortable because we're the odd person out. We're the fifth wheel. We're misfits in a coupled world. That's hard. It's not just hard for those of us who are experiencing it. It can be hard for people who love us, who don't know what to do with us. And grief can have an impact on your physical health. And can also cause you to struggle to the point where you need to embrace the possibility maybe of professional counseling. And there's nothing to be embarrassed about to seek counseling. In my Bible, I carry everywhere I go a card that says, "In loving memory, Andrew James Allen, January 2015, October 2022. Andrew, 7 years old. You see his mother and his father. Andrew's dad is the preacher for the Main Street Church of Christ in Pikeville, Kentucky. When I heard about Andrew's passing, I was visiting with my daughter in Gainesville, Florida. And we got in the car and we drove to Pikeville, Kentucky to be at the visitation and to be at the memorial service. The most touching memorial service, the most touching visitation I've ever experienced. People from the hospital flocked to that church building. People in the school system flocked to that church building. When we left with his body to go to the graveside, as we passed by the school he attended, the flag was at half-mast in memory of Andrew. In December, I had a workshop in Pikeville, Kentucky. Josh, the preacher there, he grew up in the Hartville, Ohio church where I preached for 33 years. He went to Freed-Hardeman University. He has a Bible degree. He met his wife there. Why would they lose Andrew? Maybe RSV, but they don't know for sure. Nobody could help him. At their home, what do you think his room looks like? Yeah. Life can be so hard. It's just like sometimes a chunk of your heart is ripped out of you. And it's hard just to breathe and put one foot in front of the other. Grief is powerful. It does have an effect on us. One thing it does is it challenges us. You know, when it comes to these struggles that we have, I think one thing that we need to understand and appreciate, that every struggle that we have is something that we can turn into a blessing. By the grace of God, we have the ability to take the awful things we've experienced in our life and actually turn them into blessings. It's an amazing thing how that can happen. In Romans chapter 5, let me read you just a section, beginning in verse 3. And not only that, but we glory in tribulations. Now we grieve in tribulations too. We're human. We grieve in tribulations. But it says in verse 3, not only that, we also glory in tribulation, knowing that, here's how we can glory in tribulation, knowing that tribulation produces perseverance. Perseverance, character, and character, hope. And hope does not disappoint because of the love of God which has been poured out in our hearts by the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. Tribulation produces perseverance. That's endurance. That perseverance and endurance produces character. And that character produces hope that cannot disappoint. You can't say that about prosperity, but you can say that about adversity. We can grow. We can use this period of time to painfully grow in our life and get to a point where we've never actually been before. Where in our life, wonderful things have been added to our life, but we paid a dear price. The price is loss. You know when I really started appreciating the life of the widowed when I started to have to live it. My perspective is very different now, both about marriage and about loss. It's very different now. But what price did I pay to get to that place? I paid a very heavy price. And that's why I want to use what I've used in my past to try to be a blessing to others. There's 3 mottos in the Widowhood Workshop Ministry. Don't die until you're dead. Some people, when they suffer great loss, they just exist for the rest of their life. They don't really live. Don't die until you're dead. Don't waste your pain. Use what you've experienced, that ugly stuff, to bring glory to God by being a blessing to other people. And make sure that you embrace the concept, I can and I will. I can and I will get through this day. I can and I will grow through this experience. I can and I will use what I've experienced to help other people. I can and I will still glorify God no matter whether I have all of my kids in the Lord faithful or I have some stray. I can and I will be faithful to you. I hope that that's been helpful to you. I hope it's been an encouragement to you. And I hope that, at least from this morning, you leave here with a commitment to take every burden that you've ever been stuck with in your life and use it to help other people. Tomorrow morning in a Bible class and worship, we're going to be talking about the challenge of praising the Lord no matter what. We're also going to be talking about and studying from Psalm 31 in our Bible class, a psalm where David was obviously overwhelmed, and he really teaches us what we ought to do when we're overwhelmed. And then I want to share with you about 5 o'clock tomorrow. In that session, it is, in my opinion, the most important session in any workshop I do. It's a personal perspective about loss. I think it's the most valuable, most impactful session, and I really hope that you can be here tomorrow at all 3 of the sessions. But I also realize that you have a life, and you may have another church family that you worship with. If you choose to come here and desert your church family, we're not going to squeal on you. You can come here. And if you need an absence slip to take back to your church family, we'll come up with one. Can't we, Lane? We can come up with one. Thank you very much for coming. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Let's spend a moment in prayer. Father in heaven, we are so richly blessed, and it's just amazing how good you've been to us. Thank you. Father, help us to use those blessings and be grateful for them and bring glory to you and our prosperity. We also suffer adversity, and some in this room maybe right now, struggling mightily with a phase in their life. Father, bless them consistent with their needs. I pray that they'll be more open about their struggle so that they can have people that they can trust, be of help with them, to walk with them, to be your comforter, your hugger, your encourager. Father, we pray that you'll be with us and give us safety to where we're going today. We pray that we'll be able to come back tomorrow. Thank you for this church and their willingness to host this time together. Father, thank you for everybody who's come out. We pray that everybody has been able to take something from this that makes this time worthwhile to them. Thank you, Father. It's in the name of Jesus we pray. Amen. Lane, before people leave, can you real quickly, I want to make sure everybody gets this chance. Here are some booklets that I'd like for everyone to receive. The Williams brothers, who are biological brothers, but also they are brothers in the Lord. Don and Ron Williams, they wrote this booklet. My family buys this product from them, and we distribute it free to you who come to the workshop. How can I help myself and others in times of grief? This is a very valuable resource. And then also, 8.5 by 11 sheets. Miss Laura, there's some. Did everybody get those white sheets? We want you to have that material to take home. Maybe that could be of benefit to you. My contact information is in that material, those white sheets, and feel free to contact me if I can be of any help. And if you're not going to be back tomorrow, let me ask you to let other people know about the ministry, about your workshop experience. We'd appreciate that. If you're on Facebook, plug in 3 words, Widowhood Workshop Ministry. That's the public Facebook page for the ministry. If you're on the web, go to widowhoodworkshop.com. There's some videos there, blogs there, and some different things there that maybe could be of help to you or help others. Again, thank you very much for coming. I won't ring the bell again. Yes, ma'am. Okay, yes, you may go right ahead. Can help your marriage. Can help your marriage, can it? I need to get the 2 of you together and do me an advertisement. What do you charge per minute for an ad? Thank you, Miss Elizabeth. Thank you. You all have a good day.